Hey there. Tonight, we're not wandering through sunlit fields or warm markets, but to a place where every creak and groan in the ancient walls tells a story of decline. The Roman Empire was once the greatest force the world had ever seen, stretching from the windswept coasts of Britain to the sun-drenched deserts of Egypt. It was a place of roads, armies, emperors, and laws that shaped the future for thousands of years. But this vast empire, which seemed eternal, began to crack and crumble. So, before you get cozy under that warm blanket, go ahead and like this video and subscribe to the channel. But only if what I do here genuinely helps you wind down at night. And hey, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? And what time is it right now? There's something oddly soothing about knowing there are others awake with us, wandering through history together. Now, dim the lights. Light a candle if you've got one, or just let the gentle glow of your screen pull you in. Close your eyes, and slowly let the weight of the day slip from your shoulders. You woke up as a Roman citizen in the year 238 AD, and you're living through what historians politely call a crisis. You'd call it something more colorful. But Latin doesn't have a word for utter dumpster fire. There's good news and bad news. The good news is you technically still live in the Roman Empire. The bad news is no one seems to know who's actually in charge. You went to bed with Emperor Maximinus on the throne and woke up to find he's been decapitated and replaced by 2 senators in togas who are so old they fart dust. Don't get attached. They'll be dead by next week. Welcome to the crisis of the 3rd century, where emperors are like mayflies, short-lived, poorly equipped for leadership, and constantly getting squashed. It starts with one assassination. Just one. Emperor Severus Alexander gets bumped off by his own troops in 235 AD. Why? Because he suggested negotiating with the Germans instead of murdering them? Bad call. The legions don't do diplomacy. They do stabbing. So they stab him. Problem solved. Except now the throne is empty, and every ambitious general in a breastplate thinks he's got a shot. Spoiler alert, they don't. The next 50 years are basically an imperial version of speed dating, but with more poison and fewer second chances. By the time this roller coaster slows down, 26 different men will have worn the purple sash. Not one retires peacefully. Most retire feet first, frequently missing a head. You might be wondering, how does an empire even function with a new emperor every other harvest? It doesn't. Rome is like a ship with 26 captains, all arguing while the hull's on fire, and everyone's too busy stabbing each other to notice the iceberg. Let's talk about the selection process. Forget democracy. Forget senatorial approval. Forget divine omens. If you've got a sword and a few hundred grumpy soldiers, congratulations, you're emperor now. Until your men realize you don't have enough gold to pay them. Then they make your intestines your resignation letter. One delightful example: Gordian I and II, a father-son duo who became emperors after a local uprising in Africa. How long did they last? 3 weeks. One was killed in battle, the other committed suicide. That's the kind of job security you get when your resume just says, "We hate the last guy." Then there's Philip the Arab. Yes, that was his actual name. He ruled for a few years, threw a big party for Rome's 1000th birthday and was promptly murdered for being slightly too peaceful. Then came Decius, who decided to fix everything by persecuting Christians and making everyone worship old Roman gods again. Surprise, didn't work. He died in battle, probably regretting that whole divine mandate thing while he was being skewered by Gothic spears. And the Goths? Yeah, they're here now too, along with the Persians and the Franks and internal revolts and pirate raids. But don't worry, your glorious new Emperor Valerian is going to fix all of this, except he gets captured alive by the Persians and used as a royal footstool until he dies. Yes, a footstool. The only Roman emperor to be captured alive, and they literally stood on him. So who's next? Gallienus, Valerian's son. He tries to hold things together, but his empire is so broken, it splits into pieces like a clay pot falling off a chariot. You've got the Central Roman Empire, the Gallic Empire, a breakaway chunk in the west, and the Palmyrene Empire, a slice from the east, led by a queen with more charisma than all 26 emperors combined. Rome is now less of an empire and more like a group project where nobody speaks to each other, and half the members are trying to set the scrolls on fire. Every province has its own emperor. Now, some rule for a few years, some rule for a few days. One guy, Pupienus, yes, that's his real name, co-ruled for a few months and got murdered in his bath. Another, Hostilian, died of the plague. Or maybe poison. At this point, does it matter? The economy is tanking, the army is disloyal, and the border is basically just a polite suggestion. The only thing Rome is good at now is producing corpses in purple cloaks. By the time you get to Aurelian, the emperor who finally glues the empire back together like a drunk carpenter, you're just numb. He's tough, smart, and somehow doesn't die in battle. No, he gets assassinated by his own staff over a clerical error. Seriously, a secretary forged a document, and instead of asking questions, the guards stabbed their boss in the liver. Efficiency, Roman style. Imagine being a citizen during this mess. You hear a name on Monday. Marcus so-and-so is emperor now. You nod, mutter a prayer, and buy a cheap coin with his face on it. By Friday, you're melting it down to make buttons, because Marcus so-and-so is now fertilizer, and someone named Tacitus is in charge. No, not the historian. Different guy. This one lasts 6 months before collapsing from either stress, poison, or just sheer disbelief. And yet somehow the empire doesn't immediately crumble. It limps forward, bloodied but not broken. Roads still function. Baths still steam. Bread is still baked. Even in chaos, Rome's machine keeps grinding, fueled by taxes, soldiers, and blind stubbornness. But here's the kicker. The real damage isn't the assassinations, it's the precedent. Now, every general with a sharp sword and a pouty lip thinks, hey, I could be emperor. And every time the throne changes hands by force, the empire loses more blood, more loyalty, more legitimacy. By the end of this half-century bloodbath, the empire is exhausted. The borders are fraying, the coffers are empty, the people are disillusioned, and the barbarians, they're watching, waiting, learning. Because if the Romans are this good at killing each other, why bother invading? Just give it time. You've just been appointed governor of a Roman province. Don't celebrate. You were the fourth choice. The other three either died, defected, or politely declined because they weren't insane. But you accepted because you love Rome, or because you owe someone money. Either way, welcome to your new post. You now oversee a territory roughly the size of a modern European country. Problem is, you haven't got a functioning map. Rome has conquered so much land that no one, including Rome, knows exactly where the borders are anymore. Is that your jurisdiction? No idea. Ask the guy riding a donkey for 6 weeks to deliver a scroll from the capital that says, "Please fix the rebellion." Because yes, there is a rebellion. There's always a rebellion. Somewhere between Gaul and Germania, someone's always refusing taxes, torching granaries, or stabbing Roman merchants. Your job is to stop it. With what army? Excellent question. Your local garrison is 14 half-starved veterans and a goat named Titus, who might actually be the most competent soldier. Here's the thing. No one likes to admit, Rome got too good at winning. And winning meant land. Lots of land. The kind of land that comes with deserts, mountains, disease, and people who don't want you there. For a while, expansion felt great. March in, raise the eagle standard, build some baths, collect taxes. Easy. But then you had to keep doing it, and defending it, and feeding it, and remembering where you left it. By the time of peak empire, Rome controlled everything from the misty cliffs of Britannia to the sun-blasted sands of Egypt. That's 5,000 kilometers of good luck keeping that together. It takes weeks to get a message from one side to the other, assuming the courier isn't eaten by wolves, killed by bandits, or lost in a mountain pass that doesn't exist on any map because nobody in Rome has ever been there. Oh, and forget efficient bureaucracy. Sure, there are officials. They wear togas and nod sagely and write things in Latin, but they're also busy taking bribes, hosting orgies, and arguing about wine. The imperial administration is less of a streamlined governance machine and more of a collection of dudes winging it until something catches fire. Literally. And speaking of fire, cities burn down, roads collapse, aqueducts get clogged with bodies or moss or both. And if you think the emperor is going to send help, good luck. He's either too far away, already dead, dealing with 15 other crises, or in a bath somewhere being fanned with peacock feathers while the treasury bleeds silver. Let's talk about communication. You want to send a message to Rome? Better hope it's not urgent. Because Roman mail isn't a postal service. It's a gamble. Scrolls vanish. Messengers disappear. The roads are long, bandits are hungry, and weather doesn't care if you're carrying orders from Caesar himself. Meanwhile, your province needs grain. But the grain is in Africa, and Africa is across the sea, which is currently infested with pirates. You could try rerouting through Hispania, but that road got washed out in the last flood, and no one fixed it because the funds got misplaced by some senator whose villa has more marble than your entire city. It's fine though. Just tax the locals harder. Oh wait, they already hate you. Because Rome isn't just everywhere, it's everyone. You've got Gauls, Greeks, Egyptians, Syrians, Britons, Berbers, Dacians, and a handful of very confused Germans who still think they're fighting Julius Caesar. Everyone speaks a different language. Everyone has their own gods. Everyone wants something, and none of them want to pay taxes to a guy from Latium who keeps saying civitas. Like, it solves problems. The truth is, Rome didn't build an empire. It built a very large, very wobbly game of Jenga. Each new conquest was another block stacked higher, and for a while, it looked impressive. But no one planned for the moment when you had to start pulling pieces out to fix the holes at the bottom. And now, you're in charge of one of those holes. Congratulations. Again, defending the borders is a full-time job, but you're understaffed and outmatched. Local tribes know the terrain better than your maps do. They raid, disappear into the forest, then come back next week, like it's a hobby. Your legionnaires are exhausted, poorly paid, and increasingly made up of foreigners who don't speak Latin, don't love Rome, and wouldn't mind switching sides if the barbarians offer better dental. Wait, you're still here? Impressive. Most governors burn out within a year, or get assassinated, or quietly abandon their post and take up goat farming in Crete. Honestly, not a bad move. Meanwhile, back in Rome, the Senate is arguing about temple funding. The emperor is declaring another festival to celebrate his own greatness, and the imperial bureaucrats are inventing new titles for each other, while the empire teeters like a drunken centurion on stilts. And you're realizing that no amount of conquest, no volume of Latin law, and no number of marble statues can keep this mess glued together forever. The empire isn't falling because it's weak. It's falling because it's too strong, in too many places, for too long, with too few people who actually understand how any of it works anymore. But hey, chin up. You've still got a toga, a fancy ring, and the mild respect of a local merchant who thinks you might be a demigod. Just don't turn your back on him. He's been talking to the Visigoths. The year is somewhere in the late 3rd century, and things are going great. If your definition of great includes economic collapse, political murder, and staring into the gaping maw of bankruptcy with nothing but a rusty denarius in your toga pocket, let's talk about gold. That shiny, glorious, buttery soft metal that Rome used to practically swim in. Back in the good old days, when generals were off stabbing Gauls and stealing their jewelry, gold flowed into Rome like cheap wine at a patrician wedding. Conquest was the business model. You stab people, take their stuff, haul it back to Rome, and declare victory. The Senate throws a parade, the soldiers get bonuses, and the emperor pretends he planned the whole thing. But here's the problem. Eventually, you run out of new people to stab, or at least new people worth stabbing. The outer limits of the empire started looking less like a treasure map and more like a very expensive mistake. Every new campaign cost more, delivered less, and usually ended with your legions knee-deep in some swampy backwater being ambushed by guys in fur capes who had never even seen a bathhouse. So the gold stopped coming. And Rome? Oh, Rome did not handle it well. You see, the entire Roman economy was built like a Ponzi scheme with better sculpture. They needed new conquests to pay for the last ones. That temple renovation, funded by Gaul, that new aqueduct, thank Carthage. That weird statue of the emperor riding a horse while pointing vaguely at the sky, paid for by the bones of 1,000 Britons. But now, nothing. Just a pile of IOUs, military paychecks that bounce higher than the Colosseum steps, and some deeply unamused senators wondering if they can expense their wine. But don't worry. The government had a plan. Taxes. Oh yes, when in doubt, squeeze the locals like an overripe fig. If you were a small farmer, congratulations. Your tax bill just doubled. No, you can't pay in olives. No, they don't care that the roads are full of bandits and your donkey was stolen. The empire needs your money, or failing that, your land. And if you can't pay either, surprise, you now owe the government yourself. Welcome to debt slavery. Please report to your nearest latifundium and try not to die too quickly. Meanwhile, the elites? Oh, they're doing just fine. They've already relocated their estates out to the countryside, where the taxes are mysteriously lower. Funny how that works. They're sipping wine, writing bad poetry, and totally not worrying about how the empire is bleeding out like a stabbed consul in a toga party brawl. As long as their silver spoons still sparkle, who cares if the roads crumble and the army hasn't been paid since last harvest? And then there's the army. You know, the guys who are supposed to defend Rome's 1,000-mile border with nothing but sandals and javelins? Yeah, they're super motivated when they're not getting paid. Soldiers used to be rewarded with land, loot, and maybe a slice of captured pie if they were lucky. Now, they get promises, propaganda, and the occasional bag of worthless coins so debased they might as well be chocolate. Speaking of coins, let's talk about those. Rome had this little habit of watering down the currency. Think of it like cutting wine with vinegar, but instead of getting drunk, you just get robbed. The gold and silver content in Roman coins dropped like a senator's morals at a gladiator after-party. What used to be solid, precious metal turned into a junk drawer of copper, tin, and economic lies. Merchants noticed. Prices soared, and suddenly, buying a loaf of bread cost more than bribing a magistrate, which, believe me, was no small sum. The lack of gold also meant no more grand construction projects, no new roads, no fancy baths, no theaters full of drunk citizens watching lions eat people. The empire's infrastructure, once the envy of the world, started to look like it was held together with hope, spit, and some very confused pigeons. Rome's solution? Mint more coins. Just pump them out. Who needs actual value when you can have more tokens of value? The mint worked overtime, churning out discs of almost money that nobody wanted and everyone distrusted. Trade slowed. Confidence evaporated. And in a move that absolutely no one found ironic, rich Romans began hoarding actual gold again, because even they didn't trust the stuff with Caesar's face on it anymore. But wait. There's more. Because Rome had conquered so much land, they had to keep funding distant border garrisons in places so cold and barbaric the wine froze in its amphorae. The costs were absurd, and every time they couldn't pay a soldier, they risked mutiny. And every time they couldn't pay a barbarian mercenary, they risked invasion. And every time they couldn't pay a provincial governor, they risked someone declaring themselves emperor. Which, spoiler alert, they did. A lot. So what do you do when the money dries up, the troops are angry, and your empire is essentially a giant antique store on fire? If you're Rome, you just pretend it's fine. You print more coins, you raise more taxes, you squeeze the peasants, you blame the gods, and then you go to the Senate and give a very inspiring speech about Roman destiny, while your toga quietly catches fire behind you. The gold stopped flowing in, and the rot set deep, not all at once, not with a bang, but slowly, quietly, like mold creeping into marble. Rome didn't fall overnight. It shrugged its way toward disaster, one unpaid soldier, one looted temple, one fake coin at a time. And as the empire dried up like an old amphora left in the sun, its enemies were watching, listening, waiting, because nothing smells quite as inviting as a rich corpse that forgot to lock the door. So, sleep tight, citizen. Dream of golden days. Because the treasury's empty, the coins are fake, and the barbarians are getting closer. And tomorrow's tax collector, he doesn't accept excuses. And here's how the government functions now. It doesn't. Everything that once made the empire powerful, its efficient administration, its disciplined legions, its vast bureaucracy, is now a giant, rusted-out, coin-operated machine. You don't get justice. You buy it. You don't earn rank. You inherit it. Or worse, cheat your way into it. The state is no longer run by Romans who believe in the Republic or the Empire. It's run by career opportunists who believe in getting paid. Bribes are everywhere. You want a position in the local council? That'll cost you. Want your grain shipment to make it through customs before it rots? Pay up. Want to avoid being conscripted into a war no one's going to win? Hope your uncle's rich enough to make that problem disappear. The system doesn't punish corruption. It depends on it. Nepotism is just as bad. The empire's being managed like a family-owned bakery, except the bread is made of sand and the owners are blind. Positions of power go to sons, cousins, and in-laws. Doesn't matter if they're competent. What matters is who they're related to. If your father was governor, you're the new governor, even if you think provinces are a type of fruit. Generals get appointed because their brother once threw a great party for the emperor's horse. And yes, there was an emperor who made his horse a senator. That actually happened. Caligula. Look it up. The imperial court? Less like a palace, more like a viper pit. Emperors are surrounded by flatterers, spies, and schemers. Everyone is plotting. Everyone wants more influence, and nobody actually wants to fix the empire. You'd think the emperor would be the most powerful man in the world. In reality, he's usually the most paranoid. One bad whisper and it's over. Knife in the ribs, poisoned figs, chucked off a balcony. Pick your method. And when you kill an emperor, guess what? You usually get promoted. That's not an exaggeration. That's just how the system works now. Loyalty isn't rewarded. Betrayal is. The only real rule is, cover your tracks and bribe the right people afterward. The Senate still exists, technically. They hold meetings. They wear togas. They argue about irrelevant things while the provinces burn. But no one listens to them anymore. Not really. The real power is in the hands of whoever controls the army or the imperial treasury, or both. Which brings us to the bureaucracy. In early Rome, it was tight, lean, organized. In late Rome, it's obese and broken. Paperwork is endless. Everything requires approval from 4 other departments, none of which answer their messages. Public funds vanish into black holes. Aqueducts don't get repaired. Roads fall apart. Not because there's no money, but because it's been embezzled by 6 layers of middlemen with fake titles and real greed. And the tax system? It's eating itself alive. Tax collectors aren't civil servants anymore. They're private contractors who bid for the right to bleed provinces dry. Once they've paid for that privilege, they squeeze the population until they make a profit, then skim more for themselves. Can't pay your taxes? No problem. We'll take your livestock, your tools, your land, your children, if it comes to that. Congratulations, you're now poor and still in debt. Even the military isn't safe from this rot. Command positions go to the well-connected, not the well-trained. Logistics get sabotaged by corrupt officials who sell army supplies for personal profit. Soldiers go unpaid. Morale drops. Loyalty disappears. The legions used to defend Rome. Now they sometimes threaten it, demanding pay raises with swords drawn. What's worse is that nobody at the top seems to care. Or if they do, they're powerless to stop it. Reformers try to fix things. They get ignored, sidelined, or assassinated. Most just stop trying. And as for you, the average Roman, you're stuck, trapped in a system that feeds on you while pretending to protect you. You see your neighbors go bankrupt. You see judges sell verdicts. You watch criminals bribe their way out of punishment while honest men starve. It's not just frustrating. It's dangerous. This isn't just a moral failure. It's a logistical one. When governors are stealing grain meant for cities, people riot. When military officers don't pay their troops, soldiers mutiny. When citizens lose faith in the system collapses. And that's where you are now, stuck in a government that looks like Rome, but works like a casino scam. The architecture still stands. The language is still Latin. The coins still bear the emperor's face. But behind the marble facades, everything is rotting. Quietly, steadily, fatally. It's not barbarians at the gates that will bring Rome down. Not yet. It's what's happening inside the gates. It's the rot at the core. The corruption so deep it's normal. The deals behind closed doors. The gold passed under tables. The power passed through bloodlines. The decay disguised as order. Rome isn't falling because of enemies. Rome is falling because Rome forgot how to rule itself. Now, let's talk money. And by money, we mean whatever the government hasn't ruined yet. You remember when Roman coins had actual silver in them? Good times. Then the emperors, bless their panicking hearts, realized they could stretch the budget by watering down the silver with cheaper metals, like bronze, or copper, or mystery gray. Anything shiny enough to trick people into thinking it had value. Surprise, it didn't work. Welcome to hyperinflation, where your coin buys less bread than yesterday, and your savings have the purchasing power of a damp sponge. You go to the market with a handful of coins and leave with a single shriveled fig and a sense of betrayal. By next week, that same handful might not even get you the fig. You consider trading your left sandal for lentils. Your neighbor traded his entire tunic for 2 onions. He says it was a good deal. You're not sure. The merchants aren't thrilled either. They've stopped using coins altogether. Bartering is back in style. Need a sack of grain? Better hope you've got chickens, or wine, or goats. If you're broke and goatless, it's going to be a long winter. And if you're rich, joke's on you. Your wealth just evaporated into the economic ether. Rome's inflation curve is steeper than the side of Mount Vesuvius. You might wonder why this happened. Simple. Rome has a spending problem and a math problem. The army keeps growing. So do the paychecks for said army. Except, spoiler alert, the treasury is emptier than a gladiator's wine jug after payday. Instead of cutting back, un-Roman, the emperors just printed more coins. A lot more. Which is fine if you're playing Monopoly, but Rome is unfortunately not a board game. It's just being run like one. Meanwhile, taxes are being squeezed out of everyone not wearing a senator's toga. And we do mean squeezed. You, humble cabbage farmer of the empire, are now required to give Rome not just a portion of your crop, but sometimes your tools, your oxen, your eldest son, and possibly your sense of purpose. The taxman doesn't knock. He just takes. And if you protest, you're obviously hiding more cabbage. Taxation becomes so desperate, they start taxing the dead. Yes, if your father died owing money, guess who inherits the bill? You do. Congrats. You're the proud owner of generational debt. You wish you could write it off, but accountants haven't been invented yet. And Roman officials don't accept "my dad is literally ashes now" as a valid excuse. Of course, the rich still get away with everything. If you're a senator, you don't pay tax. You don't grow crops. You don't really do anything except lounge around sipping imported wine and occasionally complaining about the smell of the plebs. Oh, and when things get dicey, you flee to your countryside villa while the cities rot. Real leadership. Let's not forget the Annona, Rome's grain dole. The state promises to feed the poor because an angry, hungry mob is much harder to ignore than a broke one. But now the grain shipments from Egypt are delayed, or stolen, or rerouted by pirates, or just gone. So the state starts rationing the rations. And you know what happens when you shrink the bread and cancel the circuses? Riots, fires, public urination on statues of emperors. Classic Rome. Meanwhile, price controls become a thing. Because if you can't fix inflation, why not just pretend prices are fine and jail anyone who says otherwise? Emperor Diocletian eventually rolls in with his infamous edict on maximum prices, trying to cap the cost of everything from a loaf of bread to a haircut. Sounds nice, right? Except nobody wants to sell things for government prices. So they just stop selling. Boom. Black market explosion. Congratulations, you've just invented economic whack-a-mole. And oh, your job? You can't quit. Not because it pays well, it doesn't, but because the empire has decided people should inherit their work. If you're a baker, your son is now a baker. If you're a blacksmith, so is your grandson. If you're a poor peasant, stuck in debt and barely surviving, well, great news. So are all your descendants. Forever. Welcome to hereditary economic despair. It's a family tradition now. As things spiral, the cities begin to crumble. Literally. Roads aren't repaired. Aqueducts dry up. Markets close. Buildings collapse. You'd report the problems, but no one listens unless you bribe them. And if you can't afford a bribe, enjoy the rats. They've taken over the old Senate building. You start noticing more beggars than buyers at the Forum. The temples have less incense and more mildew. Even the brothels are quiet. You don't know what's worse? That everyone's broke, or that no one even pretends the empire is rich anymore. At this point, your best bet for survival might be to move out to the countryside, grow barley, and pray to whatever gods still accept emotional payments. And the worst part? There's no single dramatic collapse, no big bang, just slow, grinding decay, like a loaf of bread left out too long. You keep waiting for someone to fix it, someone with a title, or armor, or divine wisdom. But the emperors keep dying, the coin keeps rusting, and the economy, it just keeps breaking. And that's how Rome, the richest empire on earth, went from global superpower to "we'll work for figs in just a few centuries." You didn't see it fall in a day. You lived it one miserable, inflation-riddled morning at a time. And now, you're hungry. You reach for your purse. It's full of coins. They're worthless. Hope you like bartering for firewood with toenail clippings. Right now, you're a Roman border guard in the 4th century. Your job? Watching Europe move, literally. You're standing on the banks of the Rhine, wondering how much worse things can get. Spoiler, a lot. Because on the other side of that chilly river, a whole bunch of strangers are giving you the look. You know the one. The "we're cold, hungry, and heavily armed" look. Congratulations, you're witnessing the beginning of the Great Migration period. Historians call it a population shift. You'd call it everyone showing up at once and wanting your lunch. It starts slowly, like a distant thunderstorm you think might pass. Except it doesn't. It moves directly toward you with horses, wagons, crying babies, and more beards than you've ever seen in one place. The Germanic tribes, Goths, Vandals, Suebi, Alemanni, Franks, are packing up and heading west. Not for tourism, for survival. And what are they running from? Just a little thing called the Huns, a group of terrifying nomadic horsemen from the east with absolutely no chill. But we'll get to those guys next chapter. For now, just know they arrived on the Eurasian steppe like a nightmare on horseback, smashing everything in sight and sending the tribes ahead of them into full-blown panic mode. So picture this. You're sitting in a Roman watchtower with your stale bread and half-frozen wine ration when thousands of Goths start appearing on the horizon. Not in armor, not screaming war cries, just trudging forward, pulling carts of possessions, children, and goats with the same energy as someone who's been evicted in the rain. They're not invading. Not yet. They're asking for help. Let us in, they say. We'll fight for you, work for you, pray to your gods. Just don't leave us out here with the Huns. And Rome, being the bloated, bureaucratic mess that it was, says, fine. But don't cause trouble, which is kind of like handing a starving bear a sandwich and saying, be cool about this. So the Visigoths are allowed in. Sort of. They're herded into Roman territory like cattle, placed in refugee camps with zero support, and treated like pests. You know, the classic, we invited you over, but didn't actually mean it. Hospitality. Things go downhill fast. The Romans promise food, but deliver spoiled dog meat and tell the Goths they can buy bread with their children. Yes, actual human trafficking. Unsurprisingly, this doesn't go over well. Imagine being hungry, scared, and disrespected by a failing empire that can barely pay its own soldiers. Then imagine someone trying to sell you dog meat in exchange for your nephew. Yeah, the Gothic patience meter hits 0. Enter Fritigern, a Gothic leader with a talent for military organization and a complete lack of chill. The Visigoths revolt. You're suddenly not just watching the migration anymore, you're in the middle of a full-blown disaster called the Battle of Adrianople in 378 AD. And guess what? Rome gets crushed, absolutely wrecked, an entire Roman field army wiped out. The emperor, Valens, burned alive in a farmhouse. Just like that, Rome learns that letting people in and then treating them like garbage is a bad long-term strategy. Who knew? After Adrianople, things get awkward. The Goths don't leave. They stay. They settle. Not because they conquered, because Rome had no idea how to kick them out. They were too tired, too broke, and too busy in fighting. Now, instead of a strong Roman border, you have a makeshift town full of angry Goths growing crops and training young warriors who really, really hate the empire. Think of it like raising wolves in your backyard and being surprised when one bites your leg off. And that was just the beginning, because the moment the Goths crossed the border, every other tribe took notes. Wait, you can just show up and demand land? Suddenly, the Roman frontier looks less like a wall and more like a revolving door. Here come the Vandals, the Suebi, the Burgundians, the Franks, and so many Alemanni. You start seeing them in your dreams. Some want peace, some want plunder, most just want to survive. But they weren't even trying to destroy Rome. Not yet. Most of them admired Roman culture. They wanted to live inside the empire, not burn it down. They wanted Roman clothes, Roman wine, Roman roads. Maybe not the Roman taxes, but who does? But Rome can't handle it. Its administrative system is held together with duct tape and superstition. You've got too many governors, not enough grain, and an army that now includes as many barbarians as it does Romans. Sometimes more. By the early 400s, the Roman Empire starts resembling a modern office where all the old employees quit, and the new hires were never properly trained. The borders blur, the authority thins, and the term barbarian starts to lose meaning, because now they're just neighbors. They settle in your towns. They join your army. They marry your citizens. And every time someone tries to say, maybe we should stop letting everyone in, someone else points to the eastern frontier and says, have you seen what's coming behind them? So here you are, once a proud Roman soldier, now dodging goats on what used to be a military road, watching entire civilizations resettle inside your homeland. You're not being invaded. You're being absorbed from the inside out. And somewhere far away, beyond the Black Sea, the ground begins to shake under the hooves of a new terror. A whisper spreads across the lands. The Huns are coming. Now, you've seen barbarians before. Goths, Vandals, Franks. Sure, they're hairy, loud, and occasionally stabby, but they're still vaguely recognizable. They like wine, steal Roman pottery, and sometimes name their children after dead emperors. But the Huns? The Huns are a different animal, literally. No one even knows where they're from. Somewhere east of Here Be Dragons, past the steppes, beyond the rivers you can't pronounce. They ride in with faces weathered like old boots and attitudes that suggest they'd rather eat their enemies than negotiate with them. They don't just ride horses. They live on horses. Eat, sleep, fight. Probably marry and raise children. On the horses. You've got sore thighs just thinking about it. Their horses are small, fast, and meaner than your landlord. And their archers? Let's just say they can shoot you from behind while galloping away, laughing, without spilling their fermented mare's milk. Oh, did we mention the fermented mare's milk? That's their wine. It's sour, chunky, and possibly cursed. But they love it, just like they love raiding your frontier town and giving your nervous system a medieval anxiety disorder. When the Huns first show up around 370 AD, they don't knock on the door and ask for directions. No, they crash through like the Kool-Aid man with a sword and a grudge. The first to feel the heat are the Alans and the Goths, tribes who thought they were the scary ones, until the Huns turned up and said, "Hold my horse milk." Now suddenly, those same Goths are pounding on the Roman door, begging to be let in. They're running from someone, which is already a problem. Because the moment someone is running from a fight, you know that whatever's chasing them is the real horror movie. And Rome's not prepared for horror. Rome is still stuck on the reruns of We Conquered Gaul and Look at Our Roads. The Roman generals look at the refugee crisis and do what any bureaucratic military machine would do. They panic, argue, and try to squeeze bribes out of the Goths while herding them into camps without enough food. Classic move. Treat your allies like garbage, then act surprised when they turn on you. Meanwhile, the Huns don't care. They don't stop at the Danube. They don't get politely confused by Latin. They just keep moving, burning, looting, and casually dismembering anyone who gets in the way. No negotiations, no treaties, just flaming arrows and speed. Your local town council is in shambles. The Roman governor's hiding in his villa, pretending this is a local issue. The tax collectors are still coming around, because even in the apocalypse, taxes are sacred. And you? You're hiding behind your pig shed, wondering what gods you forgot to sacrifice to. Now, the real terror isn't just that the Huns are fast, brutal, and fond of scalping. It's that Rome has no idea how to stop them. They're not like any enemy the legions have faced. They don't form neat little lines and politely wait for battle. They disappear into forests. They strike at night. They fake retreats and then circle back like angry boomerangs. Roman generals are used to predictable enemies. These guys are chaos in horse form. You hear tales from the north. Whole cities abandoned overnight. Forts burned to the ground. Farmers crucified on their own fences just because the Huns were bored. There's no logic, no politics, just destruction with a side of psychological warfare. And here's the really uncomfortable truth. The Huns don't even want your land. Not permanently. They don't want to be Roman. They don't want your aqueducts, your Latin poetry, or your overpriced amphorae of wine. They want to raid, wreck, and ride off, which is somehow worse. You can't negotiate with someone who doesn't want to rule, just ruin. The Roman military tries to rally, but the legions aren't what they used to be. Spoiler, that's coming in the next chapter. For now, the Empire's best plan is hope. Hope that the Huns get tired. Hope they run into some other poor civilization and move along. Hope that a barbarian problem will solve another barbarian problem. You remember that one centurion? Grizzled, missing 3 fingers, always chewing on something suspicious. He used to say, "At least the Goths can be bribed, but the Huns don't take silver. They take skulls." He was not exaggerating. So here you are, living history. Not the glamorous kind with togas and triumphs, the kind with fire, fear, and the sound of hoofbeats in the night. You've survived Roman tax season, Gothic migrations, and at least one questionable bowl of spoiled garum. But this is different. The world is changing, fast. And for the first time, Rome, the great, eternal, all-powerful Rome, isn't sure it can keep up. Because the Huns aren't just raiders. They're the thunder before the collapse. You're now a Roman soldier in the 4th century A.D. Well, sort of. You wear the name Roman, like a cheap bronze badge, but don't let that fool you. The glory days are long gone. You're not marching in triumph behind Caesar. You're not conquering Gaul, bathing in gold coins, or lounging in a marble bathhouse after a noble day's slaughter. Number You're freezing half to death on some godforsaken frontier post in the Balkans, wearing mismatched armor held together with hope and goat sinew, wondering if your pay will arrive before the next barbarian horde does. Spoiler, it won't. Your commander? He's from North Africa. The centurion above him? From Syria. The guy next to you in the shield wall is a German mercenary who doesn't speak Latin and thinks bathing is witchcraft. The Roman army has become a military soup, boiled from whoever was available and barely held together by stale bread, tax debt, and mutual fear of getting stabbed in the spine. Once upon a time, Rome's army was an unbreakable machine, disciplined, brutal, efficient. Soldiers trained for years, built roads, erected fortresses, and marched in synchronized lockstep like a deadly parade. Now, training consists of a sweaty man with a stick yelling, "Swing harder," before everyone gets distracted and wanders off to gamble with rocks. Promotions are less about valor and more about which senator you bribed last month with the last of your spoils from a half-burned village. No one remembers. Speaking of money, let's talk about your salary. You were supposed to be paid in actual silver coins. Noble idea. Except the coins are now mostly lead, and good luck seeing any of them on time. The treasury's empty because half the empire is collapsing, and the other half is too busy throwing parties for dying emperors. So instead, you get paid in grain, and maybe a bolt of itchy wool fabric if your superior officer hasn't redirected it into his wine cellar. Don't get too attached to your gear either. Your sword is a rusted hand-me-down from 3 campaigns ago. Your helmet smells like it used to be a chamber pot. And your chainmail? It's more mail than chain, with holes big enough to let through a decently angry squirrel, let alone a spear. And then there's morale. What's morale, you ask? That thing died 3 emperors ago. The army's loyalty isn't to Rome anymore. It's to whoever feeds them. Sometimes that's the emperor. Sometimes it's a local warlord who actually pays. And sometimes it's the invading barbarian leader who offers gold in exchange for flipping sides. Honestly, you'd consider it. Anything's better than guard duty in a crumbling outpost surrounded by wolves and existential dread. You wake up one morning, if you can call 3 hours of dreamless unconsciousness on a flea-infested cot waking up, and your unit has a new general. Again. The last one was executed for disloyalty, which in Roman military speak means he lost a battle and looked sad about it. The new guy is 22, smells like imported olive oil, and has never seen a battlefield that wasn't on a mosaic. He gives a rousing speech about courage and Rome's eternal glory, which inspires exactly no one. Then he rides off to check on his villa, while you sharpen a chipped spear with a broken tile. You're stationed on the Rhine frontier now. That's fun. It's cold, wet, and full of angry Germanic tribes who know your patrol schedule better than your own officers do. You've got a dozen half-trained men watching 100 miles of border. If someone sneezes on the far side of the river, you hear about it 2 weeks later, right before your town burns to the ground. One day, your commander receives a scroll, something about an invasion. You rally, you march, and then you realize the barbarian army you're supposed to fight is 3 times your size and better equipped because they've been looting your supply lines for 6 months. You form a line anyway. It's not bravery. It's habit. The shield wall rattles. Your sword wobbles in your hand. You whisper a prayer to Mars, Jupiter, or honestly, any god that might be listening, including the barbarian gods, because hey, they seem to be winning. The battle is a mess. Orders are shouted in 10 languages. Your flank collapses when the auxiliaries defect mid-charge. The guy behind you runs away before it even starts. You survive somehow, mostly by tripping over a corpse and lying still until the screaming stops. Afterwards, the survivors stumble back to a town that no longer exists. Burned, looted, walls blackened, women gone. The standard bearer is weeping, and the new general is nowhere to be found. He's probably writing a very poetic letter to the emperor, blaming the entire thing on weather conditions. Back at camp, you learn your unit has been disbanded. Again, you're reassigned. Again. This time to a different border, because clearly the problem isn't the crumbling empire. It's that you weren't stationed in the right disaster zone. So you pack your things, which consist of a dented helmet, half a tunic, and a pouch of dried lentils. You march off into the fog toward another doomed garrison, another forgettable skirmish, another few years of holding back the inevitable tide with broken spears and blind optimism. You're not a legionnaire. You're a patch on a sinking ship, and the hull is cracking. But hey, at least you've got your health, right? Number: no, you don't. You've got trench foot, lice, something growing on your elbow, and a cough that might be tuberculosis or just the curse of being alive in the late Roman Empire. You'll probably die of infection before an enemy sword even touches you. Still, you carry on. Because that's what Roman soldiers do now. Not conquer, not protect, not even win. Just survive long enough to retreat again tomorrow. And in a few hundred years, historians will look back and wonder, how did such a mighty empire fall? You'll laugh, or you would, if your lungs still worked, because you know the answer. You were there. It didn't fall all at once. It rusted. At this point, the good news is you're still technically a Roman citizen. The bad news? So are the Visigoths. You wake up to the sound of screaming, not the charming Roman marketplace kind, where someone's just upset about the price of olives. No, this is the barbarian warband just kicked in the gate kind. You sit up in your dusty bedbug colony of a bed, blink, and realize two things. One, your neighbor's house is on fire, and two, so is yours. It wasn't supposed to happen. Rome hadn't been sacked in almost 800 years. 800. It was like Olympus falling, like Jupiter himself tripping over his toga and face-planting into the Tiber. Rome was the center of the universe. But now, it's the centerpiece of a very loud, very chaotic buffet, and you're the appetizer. Alaric, king of the Visigoths, just kicked in the metaphorical door. Actually, he bribed someone to open the literal one, the Salarian Gate, to be exact. Turns out, loyalty is a flexible concept when your paycheck hasn't shown up in a decade. You'd be mad too if the people who promised you land, gold, and food gave you inflation and lectures instead. See? Alaric wasn't some frothing lunatic with a skull necklace and a war drum. He was a military man, a tactician. He'd fought for Rome before they stiffed him on the bonus. And now, in the most spectacular case of, fine, I'll do it myself, he's decided to sack the city because diplomacy died about 3 emperors ago. You'd love to write a complaint, But unfortunately, the postal service hasn't worked since the last emperor tripped over his own incompetence. As you stumble into the smoke-choked street in a tunic that's seen better centuries, you spot a few Visigoths dragging what looks suspiciously like your neighbor's sofa down the road. Not that you blame them. Roman wealth is just sitting around, collecting dust and imperial hubris. Statues, silverware, fancy embroidered cushions, all of it ripe for the taking. And take they do, with the casual confidence of someone who's been waiting years for this garage sale of civilization. And you? You're hiding in a broken temple, clutching a loaf of stolen barley bread like it's a holy relic. You try not to breathe too loudly because there's a guy across the street yelling about how he's a senator and should be spared. You hear a Visigoth reply something in a language that sounds like a sneeze, and then thud. Goodbye, Senator. Turns out political power doesn't mean much when your palace walls are flammable and your guards ran away during lunch. This isn't one of those noble defeats you read about in marble inscriptions. This is gritty, ugly collapse. There's no heroic last stand, no noble defense of Roman honor. Just confusion, smoke, and screaming. You pass what used to be the Roman Forum. It looks like someone used it for target practice. Statues lie in pieces, shops have been looted, and someone, probably a very sarcastic Visigoth, draped a bear pelt over a bust of Augustus. By midday, everything's chaos. Alaric didn't come to burn the city to the ground. He wanted a message. This was a, hey, remember me, level of destruction. A reminder that Rome was no longer the untouchable titan it used to be. The great eternal city was now just another city. One with plumbing that didn't work and an aristocracy that couldn't even agree on dinner. You try to find food. Bad idea. The granaries were the first to go. So was the wine, and the jewelry, and the livestock. By late afternoon, you're watching a group of nobles fight over a barrel of olives while Visigoths laugh in the background. The only functioning institution left in Rome is theft. Night falls. Fires still burn. The air smells like charred history and fear. You lie on the floor of what used to be a public bathhouse, now a makeshift shelter for anyone not currently bleeding. Somewhere, someone is crying. Somewhere else, someone is singing. You don't know if it's religious or just deeply unhinged. Honestly, it fits the vibe. Rome, for the first time since the Gauls burned it in 390 BC, has been humiliated. Visigoths roamed its streets, looted its homes, mocked its pride. And the Senate? Silent? The Emperor? Safe in Ravenna, miles away and extremely not helpful. You wonder if he even knows. You wonder if he even cares. The next morning, the Visigoths leave. That's it. No drawn-out occupation, no new regime. They just pack their stolen goods, laugh about Roman architecture, and march out the way they came in. The city is silent, in a way that isn't peaceful. It's just hollow. Like everyone who lived here, just aged a decade in a single night. And you're still alive, starving, traumatized, and probably riddled with some flea-borne disease, but technically alive. You walk past what used to be a temple, now a stable. You pick up a piece of marble that used to have someone's face on it. You don't know if it was a god, a general, or a senator. It doesn't matter now. They're all equal in rubble. This isn't just the sack of a city. It's the sack of an idea. Rome, the unbeatable, unbreakable heart of the known world, just got looted like a poorly guarded wine cellar. And while the buildings still stand, some of them, the illusion of Rome's invincibility is gone. Forever. You find a bench. Well, half a bench. You sit. The sun rises over the ruins. You're covered in soot, ash, and something you hope is just old soup. Somewhere, a crow caws dramatically, like it's auditioning for a history documentary. Congratulations. You just lived through the sack of Rome. Now all you have to do is survive what comes after. Now, the Vandals are coming. And no, they're not just here to knock over flower pots or scribble on statues with charcoal like bored teenagers. They're sailing in from North Africa with boats full of heavily armed men who are extremely interested in making your day worse. Let's back up. The Senate still exists, but it's more of a retirement club for cranky old men who argue about grain prices while the city burns. Sometimes, literally. The emperor? That's Petronius Maximus, a guy who got the job because the last emperor was murdered, and nobody else raised their hand fast enough. He's been in office for about 10 weeks. A true Roman record, not in longevity, but in how fast things can go downhill. Here's what happened. The previous emperor, Valentinian III, was assassinated, stabbed in the gut, probably for being generally terrible at his job. Maximus took over, married Valentinian's widow, and canceled his daughter's marriage arrangement to a Vandal prince. Bad move. Very bad move. Because that prince, he's the son of Gaiseric, king of the Vandals, a man who takes rejection extremely poorly and owns a navy. And now, here we are. The Vandal fleet is sailing across the Mediterranean. Rome is about to be sacked again. You'd think the Eternal City would have better security by now, but alas, no moats, no working army, no barbarians not welcome. Signs. Just panic. Glorious, chaotic panic. You wake up to shouting in the streets and the delightful sound of clanging bells, which in ancient Rome basically means start hiding your valuables and kiss the family silver goodbye. People are running, weeping, praying, and pointing toward the horizon. And there it is, the glittering Mediterranean, filled with ships. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. It looks like a floating nightmare, and it is. This is not a friendly trade delegation. This is the medieval version of a home invasion, and the front door is wide open. You consider fleeing. But to where? Outside the city walls is worse. Bandits, wolves, and worse, even more barbarians. So you do what every sensible Roman does. You hide the valuables, roll yourself in a blanket like a scared meatloaf, and hope they don't notice you. Meanwhile, Emperor Maximus does what emperors do best. He panics, mounts a horse, and tries to flee the city in full ceremonial armor. Unfortunately, the citizens of Rome are not feeling particularly loyal today. They stone him to death in the street? Yes, really. Imagine your boss trying to sneak out of a burning building wearing gold-plated pajamas, and then the interns just start pelting him with rocks. That's basically what happened. With the emperor dead and no resistance left, the Vandals stroll into Rome like they own the place. Because now, they kinda do. And here's where the Vandals really live up to their name. Now, despite popular belief, the Vandals didn't just smash everything for fun. That's a later PR issue. In truth, Gaiseric promised Pope Leo I that he wouldn't burn the city or kill everyone, as long as they didn't resist. Rome, ever practical in its old age, agreed to the terms. Take whatever you want. Just don't light anything on fire. Might as well have been carved into the city gates. And take they did. The Vandals loot everything. Gold, silver, gems, furniture, church treasures, statues, artwork, columns, windows, doors, chandeliers, probably even your neighbor's fancy sandals. You know that thing in movies where pirates walk into a mansion and take the chandelier? That happened. Except it wasn't one house. It was all of Rome. And they did it for 2 straight weeks. They even went full pirate IKEA and dismantled giant bronze statues to haul back as scrap. The Temple of Jupiter, picked clean. The Imperial Palace, stripped like a chicken carcass after a gladiator feast. They didn't burn the city, but they left it hollow. Like Rome was a giant chocolate bunny with nothing inside. They even took people. Thousands of Romans, nobles, priests, engineers, scribes, were dragged off as hostages and slaves, forced onto Vandal ships and carried off to North Africa. Your annoying cousin who always bragged about his villa in the hills? Now scrubbing sandals for a Vandal general in Carthage? Irony can be delicious when it's not happening to you. Meanwhile, the citizens of Rome are left with not much. The food stores are gone. The treasury is gone. The emperor is very much gone. Morale is in a sewer. And honestly, it might have been there, even before the Vandals showed up. And here's the kicker. This wasn't even the first time Rome had been sacked. The Visigoths did it in 410 AD. But this time it felt different. Because now it wasn't just an attack. It was a statement. A symbol. Rome, the mighty, the eternal, had been reduced to a trophy shelf for passing warlords. The Western Empire still technically existed on paper, but at this point, it was a ghost wearing a toga and pretending to hold a sword. You look around your ransacked neighborhood. The temples are empty, the market is silent, and the aqueduct hasn't worked in months. A family of goats has taken up residence in the old bathhouse. Rome, once the master of a continent, is now a looted shell being picked apart by the wind. But hey, at least the city didn't burn. So, next time someone calls your kid a vandal for writing on the wall, just remember, the real Vandals didn't just tag buildings. They cleaned out the most powerful city in the Western world, filled their boats with golden loot, and sailed off into the sunset like it was just another Tuesday. Congratulations. You survived the Vandal sack of Rome. You may now return to your regularly scheduled collapse of civilization. Rome's economy now runs on human lives like your mule runs on sadness and oats. In your home, there's a guy who trims your toenails, another who cooks your lentils, one who follows you around with a bucket, just in case nature calls in the middle of your triumphant stroll through the forum. You've never cleaned a floor, tilled a field, or lifted a chamber pot in your life. Why would you? You're Roman. Manual labor is for the enslaved, and you've got plenty to choose from. Prisoners of war, debtors, people kidnapped from the edges of the empire. They're everywhere. In homes, in fields, in mines. Oh, especially in mines. If you're born a slave and unlucky enough to end up in a Roman silver mine, your life expectancy is somewhere between imminent and oops. Nobody retires from the mines. They just stop screaming eventually. But back to you. You eat your meals hot, your toga gets washed, probably by someone named Dacia or Tiro. And You haven't done a productive thing since your uncle bribed your way into a minor magistracy. Life's good, and that, unfortunately, is the problem. Because while you're reclining at a 45-degree angle, sipping watered-down wine and yelling at your houseboy for not fanning you with enough enthusiasm, something is rotting underneath all that marble. It's innovation, or rather, the complete lack of it. Rome doesn't invent things anymore. Why should it? You've got infinite free labor. Why build a better plow when you can just throw another dozen Gallic captives at the field until it's tilled into submission? Mechanical harvesters? Too expensive. Clockwork irrigation? Who needs it? You've got bodies. Lots and lots of bodies. And when they break, you don't fix them. You just buy new ones. There's a slave market next to the forum. Pick one out like you're choosing a melon. Tap their ribs. Check their teeth. Make sure they're not obviously diseased. And boom. Problem solved. Except it isn't. Because this beautiful parasitic system has a fatal flaw. It only works when the empire is expanding. More wars means more captives. More captives means more slaves. More slaves means nobody has to learn how to do anything for themselves. But when the borders stop growing, when the conquests slow, when the legions start losing, suddenly there's a problem. You can't innovate your way out of it because no one remembers how. You're still using agricultural tools that were considered cutting edge in 150 BC. Your economy is built on sand. Well, on backs. And the backs are starting to give out. Meanwhile, the small farmers are going extinct. You've seen them, haven't you? Ragged men squinting into the sun, trying to scrape a harvest from a plot that hasn't seen rain in 3 months. They can't compete with your estate and your slave labor, so they sell their land to you, and they drift to the cities, where they become angry, jobless mobs that demand bread and circuses and occasionally riot when the wine runs out. But wait, there's more. Because slaves aren't just cheap, they're dangerous. You ever heard of Spartacus? That guy with the chin and the grudge? Yeah, he led 70,000 slaves in open revolt for 2 years. That's what happens when your workforce is bigger, stronger, and angrier than your army. The Senate sent 8 legions after him. 8. That's a lot of iron to swing at someone who just wanted to stop being whipped for breathing too loudly. Sure, he lost. Eventually. But the message stuck. You can't build your house on a volcano and act surprised when it erupts. And if you're thinking, well, we could always just free them? Congratulations. You've just become a Roman economist's worst nightmare. Freed slaves need jobs. Freed slaves become citizens. Freed slaves demand wages. Suddenly, your economy has to compete with people who expect to be paid in something other than beatings and table scraps. That's not how Rome works. Rome runs on unpaid sweat and hopes someone else fixes it before it breaks. Let's not forget the cultural rot. You remember Cato the Elder? Grumpy guy, always shouting about old values and how young people don't respect Jupiter anymore? Even he noticed the problem. Said Rome was getting soft. Said all this luxury and laziness was making everyone weak. And when someone that bitter notices a decline, you know it's serious. Because here's the kicker. Slavery didn't just ruin the economy. It rewired Roman society into a top-heavy mess. Rich got richer. Poor got poorer. Middle class got crushed like a snail under a senator's sandal. All the while, the empire kept staggering forward like a wine-drunk centurion. loud, proud, and completely unaware. It was bleeding out from a dozen tiny wounds. And you? You're still sipping that wine, still getting fanned, still barking orders at people who have forgotten more about survival than you'll ever know. But one day, the wine will run out. The fanboy will disappear. And the chamber pot? You're going to have to empty that yourself. The empire didn't fall because of one bad day. It fell because of centuries of bad habits. And slavery? That wasn't just a habit. It was the foundation. And when the foundation cracks, it all comes down. Slowly, messily, and spectacularly. Just like Rome. It starts with a trickle. Not water. Don't be ridiculous. The aqueducts stopped working years ago. No, it's people. First the senators, then the merchants, then the guy who sells olive oil but always smells faintly of vinegar and treason. One by one, they're packing their scrolls, their spoons, and their incredibly judgmental marble statues and heading for the countryside, like it's the final round of hide and seek, and the city's just been tagged it. Remember when Rome had working fountains, lit streets, heated baths, and roads that didn't try to murder your ankles? Yeah, that was cute. But that's all crumbling now, literally. Whole neighborhoods are falling apart faster than a drunk senator's toga at Saturnalia. Roofs cave in, markets stand abandoned. The temples echo with the sound of nobody praying, and the streets are full of potholes, pickpockets, and mysterious liquids that may or may not have once been soup. You used to be able to stroll down the Via Appia and admire the marble columns, maybe throw a coin to a musician, or scold a minor philosopher. Now, you're dodging feral dogs and wondering why the bakery smells like burnt turnips and existential despair. The cities are dying, and no one's fixing them because everyone in charge is either dead, fleeing, or pretending it's not their problem. The local officials? They're mostly former goat herders in sandals pretending to be magistrates, waving around wax tablets and declaring new taxes on things like air and looking suspicious. So the wealthy do what wealthy people always do when things go sideways. They run away and build bigger houses elsewhere. Welcome to the villa economy, a charming setup where aristocrats retreat to massive country estates, surround themselves with servants, and pretend the empire isn't collapsing like a badly mixed mortar wall. These villas are self-sufficient, or as close to it as you can get in the 4th century without Amazon Prime. Grain, wine, wool, vegetables, even their own blacksmiths. It's basically a gated community for toga-wearing landlords who still think Jupiter is going to fix everything. They're not just leaving the cities, they're leaving society. Rome has gone full, quiet quitting. And the towns they leave behind? Let's talk about that urban real estate. Abandoned tenements rot in silence. Some collapse, some get scavenged for bricks, and some are just taken over by squatters, stray pigs, or ghosts of bureaucrats past. Even the forums, once the bustling centers of trade and gossip, are more pigeon rave than political epicenter these days. The water situation? Gone. Aqueducts crack. No one repairs them. Bathhouses dry up. Fountains go from bubbling elegance to sad rock piles that smell like regret. You want water? Grab a bucket and hope the local well hasn't turned into a cursed bog where dreams go to drown. And speaking of infrastructure, roads. Remember that proud saying, "All roads lead to Rome"? Cute idea. Except half of them are now overgrown goat trails, and the other half are being used by bandits to mug anyone dumb enough to still travel. The once mighty Roman postal system, replaced by send it with a guy named Lucius and hope he doesn't die. Meanwhile, out in the countryside, life is peaceful. If by peaceful you mean occasionally terrifying, often smelly, and run by landowners with the personality of soggy parchment. The elites have reinvented themselves as rustic emperors. Gone are the marble floors and elaborate dinner parties. Now it's linen tunics, questionable cheese, and 400 acres of barley fields worked by people who are one bad harvest away from eating moss. The people who stay in the cities? Mostly poor, mostly desperate, and mostly pretending they're still part of a functioning empire. Bakers bake with sawdust. Weavers make thread out of hopes and curses. Priests preach to half-empty temples and consider it a win if nobody sets fire to the altar this week. Oh, and don't forget disease. With sanitation systems failing and trash piling up, cities become petri dishes of plague, dysentery, and general bodily betrayal. Your neighbor coughs once, and suddenly everyone within a 2-block radius is preparing a funeral and wondering if it's too late to become a hermit. By this point, the cities are less like Rome and more like that abandoned part of your uncle's house where the wallpaper peels and the rats wear little crowns. What used to be the pinnacle of civilization is now somewhere between ghost town and post-apocalyptic ruin, but with more sandals. Commerce? Barely hanging on, with roads broken, ports raided, and coins worth less than the metal they're printed on. Trade is drying up like a senator's last bottle of imported wine. Markets shrink, stalls disappear, and the only things being sold are turnips, superstition, and stolen bricks from the Colosseum. You know who's thriving, though? Nature. Vines crawl up crumbling temples. Weeds take over courtyards. Foxes nest in the Senate House. Birds crap freely on statues of dead emperors. It's like the earth took one look at human society and went, "Cool, my turn." So here you are. In what used to be the beating heart of a mighty empire, now reduced to a wheezing lung full of mold and broken promises, you could stay, of course. Try to sweep the street with a stick and pretend the sewer rat at your feet is just your new friend, Marcus. Or you could do what everyone else with money, land, or survival instincts did. Leave. Build a villa. Grow chickpeas. Name your goats after dead emperors. Rome isn't falling all at once. It's leaking, dripping away, one neglected roof tile, one crumbling statue, one silent forum at a time. The countryside doesn't have fountains or theaters, but at least it doesn't reek of failure and fish guts. And that's how the cities die. Not in flames or fanfare, but in quiet abandonment, buried under dust, pigeon droppings, and the echo of what used to be. The elite moved out. Civilization didn't collapse. It relocated. Also, there's something about a good plague that really clears a room. And by room, we mean an entire empire. You're sitting in a Roman insula, trying to enjoy a lukewarm bowl of barley mush when your neighbor starts coughing. Not the casual, clear your throat kind of cough. No, this is the deep, wheezing, lung-rattling kind that sounds like he's trying to eject his soul through his chest cavity. Congratulations. You now live in Rome during the Antonine Plague, also known as the ancient version of everyone's dying and no one knows why. It starts small. A few soldiers come back from the Eastern Front, fresh from Lucius Verus's campaign against the Parthians, and suddenly Half your cohort is dead. Nobody's quite sure what it is. Some say measles, others say smallpox. But what everyone agrees on is this. Whatever it is, it's spreading faster than a rumor in the Senate. You watch your local bathhouse go from packed with gossiping citizens to completely deserted, except for a dead guy in the corner and someone awkwardly trying to avoid eye contact with him. Doctors, who, in this era, treat you with goose grease, crushed beetles, and prayers to Apollo, are baffled. Galen, the celebrity physician of the age, takes one look at the situation, frowns, and quietly packs his bags for the countryside. You can't blame him. He comes back eventually and tries to document what's happening, but his report mostly boils down to everyone's got fever, vomiting, and they all end up dead. And also, I hate this. Meanwhile, people are dropping like amphorae in a clumsy warehouse. Entire households vanish within days. Funeral processions start to blend into each other. Temples are crowded with people begging for divine mercy, offering every last coin they have to whichever god they haven't already offended. Spoiler, none of it works. The gods are either on vacation or more likely socially distancing. The Antonine Plague lasts for 15 years. Not weeks, not months, 15. And over those long, glorious years of horror, the Roman Empire loses an estimated 5 million people. That's roughly 10% of the population. Think about that. 1 in every 10 people gone. Just poof. Cities shrink, farms are abandoned, trade slows to a trickle, and the army? Let's just say conscription becomes a lot easier when everyone else is dead. But wait, nature wasn't done yet. Because why stop at one plague when you can have 2? Welcome to the Cyprian Plague. It's about a century later. New emperor. Same nightmare. This time it starts in Ethiopia. But don't worry, it's generous and shares its symptoms with the whole empire. This one comes with a fun new feature. Bleeding from the eyes. Yes, the eyes. Picture that for a second. You're in the forum, chatting about overpriced olive oil, and someone next to you starts leaking crimson tears like a tragic Greek statue. Charming. Saint Cyprian, who got a front row seat to this disaster, wrote all about it. His descriptions are so vivid, you can almost smell the decay through the parchment. People vomit constantly. Their intestines pour out. Not metaphorically. Their skin turns black. It's like a walking horror novel, except nobody's walking for long. Public officials, overwhelmed and undersupplied, give up trying to help. If you're sick, you're on your own. Corpses pile up in the streets. Wild dogs and scavengers wander through alleyways that used to host bakeries and bathhouses. Entire neighborhoods become ghost towns. The air stinks of rot and smoke because the only way to deal with the bodies is to burn them. People stop naming their babies because the odds of survival are just that low. And if you thought the economy was bad before, oh boy. The grain supply collapses. The markets are empty. The road networks fall into disrepair because no one is alive or healthy enough to maintain them. Landlords can't collect rent because their tenants are all dead. The state tries to impose new taxes, but good luck taxing corpses. Inflation goes wild. Debasement of coinage accelerates. Trade networks seize up like a rusted aqueduct. And socially, things get weird. Apocalyptic cults sprout up like mushrooms after rain. People start accusing one another of divine disfavor. Christians are blamed for angering the gods. Pagans are blamed for angering the Christian God. Philosophers say the stars are out of alignment. Farmers just wish someone would show up to help with the harvest. The worst part? No lessons are learned. No grand reforms are passed. Rome doesn't rethink its fragile supply chains or come up with brilliant public health policy. It does what Rome always does in a crisis. It tries to look impressive, throws some coins at the problem, and hopes someone else will deal with it after the current emperor is assassinated. The emotional toll? You stop making friends. What's the point? You stop getting close to your neighbors because statistically, they'll be dead by next week. Weddings shrink to whispers. Birthdays vanish. Funerals become mass pits. There's no time for grief. Only shovels. If you're religious, you pray a lot. If you're not, you start being religious just in case. You offer sacrifices to Apollo, Jupiter, and any passing deity with a pulse. You whisper bargains in alleyways. You wash your hands more often. Not because anyone understands germ theory, but because you're covered in other people's plague juices. And through it all, the empire limps on, bleeding, coughing, staggering into the next disaster with fewer people, weaker institutions, and a slowly unraveling sense of identity. The plagues didn't break Rome, but they punched holes in its lungs, cracked its ribs, and made sure that when the real collapse came, the body was too weak to fight back. By the time it's over, you're not even sure what normal was anymore. There are fewer carts in the streets, fewer children playing, fewer gods you still believe in. All that's left is silence, smoke, and the smell of decay that even time itself seems reluctant to forget. And yes, the fleas survived. By the time Christianity strolled into the Roman Empire, sandals squeaking and scrolls in hand, the place was already starting to smell a bit musty. The Senate was tired, the emperors were either assassinated or missing in action, and the gods, those glorious, wine-guzzling drama queens of Olympus, were barely getting temple maintenance anymore. Jupiter's statue had pigeons living in his eye socket, and nobody could remember the last proper animal sacrifice that didn't involve bribery or a tax write-off. So when Christianity arrived, awkward, monotheistic, and very into moral hygiene, it wasn't a thunderclap. It was more like a slow, uncomfortable rearranging of furniture during a party where everyone's too drunk to notice what's happening. Until they wake up, and suddenly, there's a crucifix nailed where Bacchus used to hang. At first, the Roman government treated Christianity the way you might treat a weird street performer who refuses to leave, with suspicion, mild annoyance, and occasional violence. Christians refused to burn incense for the emperor. They skipped out on the orgies. They preached about humility, which didn't play well in a city that literally invented the toga party. Worse, they wouldn't stop multiplying. The more Rome tried to squash them, feeding them to lions, setting them on fire, or blaming them for whatever earthquake or grain shortage happened that week, the more they spread, like spiritual mold in the corners of Roman society. By the 3rd century, Christianity was less a fringe movement and more like that one houseplant that takes over the whole apartment. No matter how much you prune it, it keeps coming back, bigger, leafier, and now with a bishop. Then came Constantine. Constantine, the emperor who looked around, saw a fractured empire, dozens of gods, and 100 power struggles, and thought, You know what would fix this? Picking one god and rebranding the entire state. In 313 AD, he issued the Edict of Milan, which legalized Christianity. Suddenly, the thing that had been punishable by death was now tax-exempt. Churches popped up faster than bathhouses, and bishops got more political power than most senators. It was like if TikTok influencers suddenly ran the Pentagon. Within a generation, the empire went from persecuting Christians to shoving crosses onto every flat surface, like an early medieval marketing campaign. But with religion came rules, and not the fun ones. No more gladiator games. No more temples with convenient brothels in the back. No more tossing a coin to Mercury and then blaming him for your hangover. Instead, people were told to fast, to pray, to stop naming their kids after mythological monsters. Festivals got rebranded. Saturnalia. Now it's Christmas, sort of. Same date, fewer orgies, more guilt. Rome didn't just change its gods. It changed its rhythm, its identity, its entire vibe. Picture a city of marble slowly being wrapped in burlap and incense smoke. Less wild orgy, more solemn hymn, less wine-fueled philosophy, more arguments about heresy and divine nature. And the politics? Oh, the politics turned into theology with daggers. Bishops weren't just spiritual leaders. They were power brokers. The Council of Nicaea in 325 wasn't just a holy meetup. It was a bureaucratic brawl over the fine print of salvation. People argued for hours over whether Jesus was of the same substance as God or just of similar substance. Empires rose and fell over that difference. Blood was spilled over the Greek word homoousios. And if that sounds ridiculous, remember that some emperors were exiling bishops the way Oprah gives away cars. You get a banishment. You get a banishment. Everyone gets exiled. Rome, the proud pagan juggernaut that once mocked superstition while conquering half the known world, had now become obsessed with orthodoxy, with defining, controlling, and punishing religious dissent. And in doing so, it burned through time, money, and patience. Instead of focusing on those pesky invading tribes up north, or the collapsing economy, or the mutinous generals, the empire was spending precious resources policing theology. Military funding got rerouted to build churches. Imperial letters now addressed heresies. And emperors, who once saw themselves as semi-divine gladiator kings, now posed as humble servants of the one true God, while still murdering their rivals. Just holier about it. Christianity didn't just change what the Romans believed, it changed how they thought. The older Roman values, pragmatism, civic duty, glory through conquest, got traded for introspection, guilt, and an uncomfortable fixation on the afterlife. Military service lost its edge. After all, why die for Rome when your real reward is in heaven? Art got sadder. Philosophy got pious. And while it's unfair to say that Christianity alone weakened Rome's backbone, it definitely didn't help that the empire's new moral compass kept pointing toward martyrdom and away from stabbing barbarians in the face. Even daily life got a rebrand. Temples were stripped of idols and converted into churches. Pagan holidays were absorbed, neutered, or canceled altogether. Some cities banned sacrifices. Others fined people for traditional religious practices. Public life became less about civic rituals and more about attending Mass, repenting, and worrying if your neighbor was secretly an Arian. It was spiritual surveillance with incense and Latin choirs. And if you didn't toe the line, you weren't just out of favor, you were out of society. Excommunicated, isolated, and sometimes executed. Unity through fear, disguised as salvation. But perhaps the most dramatic shift was invisible. Loyalty. Before, a Roman citizen's top allegiance was to Rome, her legions, her law, her glory. Now, it was to God, to the church, and while sometimes those things aligned, often they didn't. Local leaders began to defer to bishops. Citizens turned to clergy for justice, for education, for food. The church filled in where the state failed, and in doing so, it slowly replaced it. Not overnight, not with banners and trumpets, but like ivy wrapping around a crumbling villa. Quiet, patient, inevitable. By the time the Western Roman Empire wheezed its final breath, the church was already setting up shop in the ruins. Bishops became de facto governors. Monks preserved what little was left. And while the Senate met in dusty halls and whispered about past glory, the church thundered from pulpits with authority and vision. It didn't just survive the fall, it rose from it. So no, Christianity didn't sack Rome. It didn't burn libraries or poison the aqueducts or whisper to the Visigoths. But it did change Rome, profoundly, permanently, and spiritually. It rerouted ambition, reshaped values, and redefined identity. It built new centers of power while watching the old ones crumble. It turned emperors into instruments of God. And then, when the empire collapsed, it calmly stepped over the rubble and kept going. Because unlike Rome, Christianity wasn't built on marble and muscle. It was built on faith, and faith, inconveniently for dying empires, doesn't need walls to grow, just believers. Now, picture this. You're the emperor of Rome. The empire stretches from soggy Britannia to scorching Syria. You've got barbarians hammering at the borders, inflation chewing through the economy like a locust on wine-soaked parchment. And your generals keep trying to kill each other, and sometimes you. The whole operation is less glory of Rome and more dumpster fire in a marble bucket. Enter Diocletian, the man, the myth, the micromanager. And by the time he shows up in 284 AD, things are so wildly out of control that his big solution is, let's split this sucker in half. Yes, half. Not metaphorically, not spiritually, literally. Like a stale loaf of bread that's too moldy to finish but too sacred to toss out, the Roman Empire is chopped into two pieces, east and west. And the hope is that if each half gets its own emperor, maybe, just maybe, things will stop catching fire long enough for Rome to survive. Spoiler alert, only one of them makes it. But we'll get there. Diocletian didn't stop with one division, of course. That would have been too easy. No, he went full-on bureaucratic buffet and created the Tetrarchy, a system where there are two senior emperors, called Augusti, and two junior emperors, called Caesars, who would supposedly take over when their bosses retired. Think of it as imperial succession by group project, with all the confusion and backstabbing of a high school science fair, but with more swords. In theory, it's organized. In reality, it's four dudes with trust issues pretending they're on the same team while sharpening knives under the table. Now, why split the empire? Well, because it's too freaking big. One guy can't be expected to handle everything from Scottish rebellions to Egyptian tax riots, while also dodging assassination attempts and praying the Visigoths don't notice Gaul is undefended. By dividing east and west, each emperor gets a smaller, slightly less insane slice of the chaos pie. And, crucially, each can focus on their own basket of burning problems without having to cross 10 provinces and a mountain range to fix them. So here's how it shakes out. The Western Roman Empire gets the chunk with Rome, Italy, Gaul, Hispania, and North Africa. You know, what most people think of when they imagine the Roman Empire. Temples, senators, gladiator movies. Unfortunately, it also gets the crumbling infrastructure, the worst economy, the most corrupt officials, and roughly 67 flavors of angry Germanic tribes camped along the Rhine. It's like inheriting a grand old mansion that's on fire and full of rats. The Eastern Roman Empire, on the other hand, gets the wealthy cities of the Greek-speaking world: Egypt, Syria, Anatolia, the juicy bits. It's got cash flow, stable trade routes, and the bustling metropolis of Byzantium, soon to be renamed Constantinople, which is like saying, I'm not just the emperor, I'm also the main character. The East is shiny, it's organized, it's not yet crawling with Huns. It has less charm, sure, but a much lower chance of being sacked on a random Tuesday. And for a hot minute, it works. Diocletian himself retires. Yes, retires like a Roman Emperor Warren Buffett, and goes off to grow cabbages in his villa in Dalmatia. It's adorable, and for a few years, the system holds. The empire isn't fixed exactly, but it's breathing. It's like taping a broken aqueduct back together with twine and prayer. Technically functioning, but don't look too closely. Then the inevitable happens. The emperors start stabbing each other again. The tetrarchy collapses like a house of poorly stacked amphorae. By 324 AD, Constantine, remember him, has clawed his way through the chaos and reunites the empire under one roof for about 10 minutes. Because as soon as he's dead, his sons start fighting, and guess what? The empire gets split again. This time, for good. From here on out, Rome is officially a two-headed beast. 2 emperors, 2 courts, 2 armies, 2 tax systems, 2 entirely different approaches to survival. The East starts building walls, hiring mercenaries with actual coin, and pretending the West doesn't exist. Meanwhile, the West is busy lighting its own eyebrows on fire. Spoiler, one of these halves will still be around 1,000 years later. The other won't survive the century. Now let's talk about logistics. With the empire split, so are the resources. The East gets more money, more people, more grain. It also gets the smart bureaucrats, the ones who can read, do math, and haven't yet tried to assassinate their bosses. The West, on the other hand, gets stuck with underfunded legions, a bloated aristocracy, and cities that are either bankrupt, besieged, or both. Rome itself becomes more of a nostalgia piece than a capital. Like a celebrity. No one listens to anymore, but still puts on the coinage for old time's sake. And culture? Oh, culture fractures hard. The East speaks Greek, reads Plato, and builds churches that look like domed pastries. The West speaks increasingly garbled Latin, forgets how to build proper roads, and turns half its forums into grazing fields. The Easterners look down on their Western cousins as brutes in togas. The Westerners look back with resentment and wonder why the East won't send troops when yet another horde crosses the Danube and starts redecorating. Religion? Don't even start. Christianity becomes the only unifying thread, but even that frays fast. the East gets tangled in theological debates involving obscure terms no one understands except angry monks with pointy hats. The West can't decide if they love the Pope, hate the Pope, or are the Pope. Bishops become warlords. Monasteries become fortresses. Jesus weeps quietly in the background while the empire slowly eats itself. By the time the 5th century rolls around, the West is wobbling like a dying mule. Its emperors are puppets, its cities are looted, and its armies are more barbarian than Roman. The East? Still kicking. Byzantine, they'll call it. Surviving, scheming, backstabbing with flair. The split didn't just divide an empire. It created two worlds, one that would crumble into memory and myth, and one that would linger like an old perfume, familiar, ghostly, and surprisingly long-lasting. So yes, Diocletian's split may have been a desperate gamble, but in hindsight, it was also a prophecy. The West would fall. The East would endure. The empire wasn't dying all at once. It was being dissected, piece by piece, until one half floated off into history, while the other quietly rebranded itself and kept going. All because one man looked at a collapsing superpower and said, "Let's try cutting it in half." Roman Britain, once a sparkling jewel in the empire's crown, had been the proud stage for legions, villas, and bathhouses for centuries. But by the late 4th century, that sparkle had dulled into something closer to a dull bruise. The grand Roman project of civilizing the island with roads, walls, and taxes was quietly unraveling. Like an old wool cloak moths had forgotten to eat, but everyone wished they had. Rome's grip on Britain was slipping faster than a drunk senator on a marble floor. And when Rome finally decided it had better things to do than babysit some foggy island at the edge of the world, Britain was left to scramble in the dark. The first sign Rome was losing interest wasn't a dramatic exit or an official letter saying, "Thanks for the memories, but we're done." No, it was more subtle, like the slow turning off of the water in the bathhouse. The legions, once tens of thousands strong, the muscle and backbone of Roman control, started drifting away. They were pulled back to the continent where Germanic tribes were knocking louder and with better timing. Slowly, one by one, the forts and garrisons emptied. The soldiers who remained were mostly locals, poorly trained and underpaid if they were paid at all. Imagine trying to guard your house with your cousin and the guy who once lost a duel to a chicken. That was the state of the Roman army in Britain by the early 5th century. Without troops, the entire Roman system started to crumble like an overbaked loaf. Roads, once kept smooth for imperial messengers, sank into mud or were swallowed by weeds. Public buildings, from forums to baths, stopped receiving their regular doses of marble dust and warm water. Taxes went uncollected because the tax collectors fled or were too busy fending off raids. The local elites, those ambitious British nobles who had bought into Roman civilization, found themselves holding empty titles and empty pockets. They still wore their togas at ceremonies, but underneath, they were just as scared as anyone else. Local governance, which had once been a mirror of Roman bureaucracy, turned into a joke. The governors sent from Rome became more symbolic than effective, often staying months, sometimes years, without even leaving their villa gates. The imperial bureaucracy, which had been the sprawling engine of order, started to bloat and falter at the same time. Communication with the distant capital slowed to a crawl. Paperwork piled up in neglected offices, and orders got lost in translation or ignored outright. If you send a letter asking for reinforcements, you might get a vague reply 2 years later, advising you to hold the line. Helpful, right? This was the age when Britain effectively became a set of city-states and tribal kingdoms with Roman names, but none of Rome's muscle. The old network of roads and towns formed something like a patchwork quilt of semi-independent fiefdoms, each doing its best to keep the peace, or at least keep the barbarians at bay, on their own. The idea of a united Britain under Roman rule was as mythical now as a peaceful day in the Colosseum. The countryside, which had once been orderly farms supplying grain to the empire, was now a tangle of abandoned fields, small fortified settlements, and desperate villagers who had taken up whatever weapons they could find. Speaking of barbarians, the ones at the gates, Anglo-Saxons, Picts, Scots, and who knows what else, were getting bolder every year. These groups had been raiding the coastlines for centuries, but now the lack of Roman military presence meant those raids turned into full-on invasions. They didn't knock politely either. Villages were burned, nobles were killed or dragged away, and entire regions slipped out of the old Roman orbit. The so-called barbarian newcomers brought their own customs, languages, and gods, making the island a patchwork not only of power struggles, but of cultures clashing and mixing. And what about the people left behind? The Romano-British population found themselves in a bind. They weren't fully Roman anymore, not in the way they remembered it, anyway. And they weren't fully barbarian either. They were stuck in a limbo of survival. Some tried to hold on to Roman ways, still speaking Latin, practicing Roman law, and praying in Christian churches. Others adapted or fled, joining rising local kingdoms or even the invading groups. Britain was becoming a shadow of its former self, a ghost empire haunted by memories of legions marching down paved streets and governors shouting orders from marble thrones. By 410 AD, Rome's final goodbye was delivered, not with fanfare or a grand speech, but with a simple letter from Emperor Honorius telling the Britons to look to their own defense. Translation: we've got too many problems. Good luck. You're on your own now. Imagine being handed the keys to a car that's run out of gas, steering broken, and the driver vanished into the fog. That was Roman Britain's last moment as part of an empire that no longer had the stomach or resources to keep it. With Rome's exit, the old Roman administrative structure collapsed almost overnight. Taxes disappeared, armies disbanded, and the formal titles that had once given officials power became meaningless scraps of paper. Local warlords, tribal chiefs, and ambitious landlords filled the vacuum, often fighting each other more than the invaders. Authority became personal and immediate, rather than institutional and distant. If you wanted to survive, you either pledged loyalty to the strongest guy around or fortified your home and hoped for the best. This was not a slow decay, but a rapid transformation. The island, once a province buzzing with Roman efficiency, became a frontier of chaos and adaptation. Roman Britain didn't fall in the traditional sense. It unraveled into a collection of small kingdoms, each carving out its own destiny from the ruins. The grand Roman dream of a civilized, orderly island faded into legend, replaced by a gritty patchwork of survival. And all the while, the bureaucracy that had once ruled vast territories with an iron pen became a bloated ghost. Officials in Rome still sent out decrees and orders for provinces that no longer existed, scribbling plans and laws for places they could barely remember. Leadership became symbolic, a shadow game played in the distant city, while reality rotted in the provinces. Rome's obsession with paperwork and titles couldn't stop the decay, because leadership had lost its teeth and its voice. The empire's heart was beating, but the limbs, Britain among them, were dying of neglect. So Britain, once a proud Roman province with roads, baths, and legions, was left stranded, a land where Latin echoes clashed with new languages, where abandoned villas decayed alongside emerging hill forts, and where the old gods' temples were replaced by wooden churches and pagan shrines. A land where the rule of law gave way to the rule of might. A land where Rome's shadow lingered, but its light was gone. In the end, Roman Britain wasn't conquered in a single battle or by a dramatic siege. It was abandoned, forsaken like an old dog left tied to a post, while Rome turned inward to fight its own crumbling empire. The great machine that had ruled half the world was too busy with enemies on all sides, too tangled in bureaucracy, and too distracted by its own collapse to remember a distant island that once mattered. Britain was left to fend for itself, and it did what it could, scraping by, adapting, surviving, and quietly, without fanfare, becoming something new. So, Italy, the jewel in Rome's crown, the place where emperors strutted, poets wrote, and citizens ate their olives like they owned the world. By the 5th century, however, Italy wasn't so much a jewel as a cracked, half-forgotten bauble that had been dropped one too many times on the cobblestones. Enter the Ostrogoths, a people who, let's just say, were not exactly invited guests, but more like the neighbors who show up unannounced, eat all your bread, and rearrange your furniture. The Ostrogoths had been roaming the edges of the empire for decades, watching the Romans from the sidelines like hungry wolves at a dwindling picnic. They were once fierce warriors under their king Theodoric, who somehow had the sense to make Italy his new stomping grounds. Not by gentle invitation, mind you, but by marching in, taking towns, and setting up shop in what was left of the Western Roman Empire, which, spoiler alert, wasn't much. The empire wasn't just cracking, it was practically disintegrating like an overcooked stew left on the fire too long. Theodoric and his Ostrogoths saw an opportunity to snatch what power remained, and they took it with all the subtlety of a drunk elephant in a china shop. Rome itself was no longer the unstoppable heart of the world, but a tired old city trying to remember its glory days. The Senate was still around, but it was about as useful as a paper shield against a barbarian's axe. The imperial court was a ghost, and local leaders were trying to hold together scraps of authority, like a child desperate to keep a crumbling sandcastle from washing away. The Ostrogoths, surprisingly enough, didn't just pillage and burn, at least not all the time. Theodoric played a long game. He married into Roman aristocracy, learned Latin, sort of, and styled himself as the new Roman ruler with a barbarian twist. It was a weird hybrid. Gothic king meets Roman emperor meets reluctant landlord trying not to upset the neighbors. This delicate balancing act meant Rome got a bit of peace. Peace that felt more like the calm before the storm. Or, better put, a quiet pause before someone knocked over the table again. But while Theodoric was busy playing nice with the Romans, other corners of the empire were collapsing faster than a cheap tent in a hurricane. Invaders weren't just knocking on the gates. They were moving in, setting up shop, and inviting their friends over. The Vandals had already ransacked Carthage and turned North Africa into their personal playground. The Visigoths held sway in Gaul and Spain. The Western Empire was becoming less empire and more landlords and tribes squabbling over ancient ruins. Amid this chaos, one man stood out like a battered shield barely holding a hole in the defense: Flavius Aetius. If the empire had a last hope, it was this guy, a military general, part diplomat, part warlord. Aetius was the Roman equivalent of that exhausted coach yelling at a team that already wants to quit. Born into a noble family, trained with the Huns. Yes, those terrifying horse archers, and politically savvy enough to survive countless court intrigues. Aetius was the empire's best bet. And believe me, the bar was so low that just showing up counted as a win. Aetius's crowning achievement, or at least the most famous one, was his role in the Battle of the Catalonian Plains in 451 AD. Picture this: Rome's ragtag army, along with some uneasy barbarian allies, facing off against Attila the Hun, the original nightmare on horseback. Attila was the empire's version of a demonic pestilence with a sword, sweeping across Europe, burning everything in sight. The battle was brutal, messy, and ultimately a draw, but Aetius managed to stall the Hun invasion and keep Attila from turning Roman lands into ash and ruin. For a moment, it felt like the empire might still have some fight left in it. But here's the catch. Winning the battle didn't win the war. The empire was already hemorrhaging power, resources, and faith. Aetius was the last general with enough skill and luck to hold the patchwork defenses together, but even he couldn't fix what was fundamentally broken. The Roman army was a shadow of its former self, made up of mercenaries, barbarians who barely followed orders, and aging veterans too tired to care. The economy was gutted, political infighting was rampant, and the people? They were too busy surviving the fallout to care who wore the crown. Meanwhile, Aetius was playing a dangerous game of balancing the competing barbarian tribes inside the empire's borders, trying to keep them from turning against each other and the empire, while simultaneously fighting off external threats. It was like juggling flaming swords while riding a wild horse through a field of landmines. He bribed some, fought others, and occasionally brokered alliances by marrying his children off to barbarian royalty. It wasn't glory. It was sheer survival. And every year, it became harder to hold the empire together. Eventually, the very people Aetius tried to protect turned against him. Emperor Valentinian III, feeling threatened by the general's power and popularity, had him assassinated in 454 A.D. It was the classic Roman political move. Kill your strongest general and hope things don't get worse. Spoiler alert. They did. Without Aetius, the Western Empire's defenses collapsed quickly. The Ostrogoths, Visigoths, Vandals, and other groups sensed blood in the water. Italy became a battlefield. Rome itself was sacked multiple times. The city that once ruled the known world was reduced to a prize in a gladiatorial death match between tribal kings and fading Roman nobles. By the time Romulus Augustulus, often called the last Roman emperor, was deposed in 476 AD, it was less a dramatic overthrow and more a quiet eviction. Odoacer, a Germanic chieftain, simply walked into Ravenna and took over. No grand battle, no last stand, just a tired empire finally giving up the ghost. The Western Roman Empire was gone, but the stories of generals like Aetius lingered on as echoes of what might have been. The Ostrogoths didn't just invade Italy, they became the new rulers of the ruins, blending Gothic traditions with the remnants of Roman administration. The empire had disintegrated not in a fiery blaze, but in a slow, grinding decay, with leaders like Aetius trying and failing to stop the inevitable slide into history's dustbin. So, when you think about the fall of Rome, remember this: it wasn't one catastrophic event. It was a series of exhausting scrambles, bitter betrayals, and desperate last stands. The Ostrogoths moving in was less a conquering horde and more a messy, uncomfortable takeover of a house no one was really maintaining anymore. And Aetius? He was the last man standing, the general who kept the lights flickering in a collapsing building, long enough for everyone to see just how dark the night would become. In 476 AD, Romulus Augustulus is deposed. Rome falls, for good this time. Imagine Rome in 476 AD, the Grand Empire, once the center of the known world, now a shadow of its former self. The city that had ruled vast territories stretched from Britain to North Africa and from Spain to the Middle East was gasping for breath. Its walls still stood, weathered but formidable. But inside, everything was crumbling. Politically, militarily, socially. The Western Roman Empire had been unraveling for decades, but now it was at the point of no return. The man sitting on the throne was Romulus Augustulus. His name sounds like a joke in hindsight. The last Western Roman emperor, a boy emperor no older than a teenager, and the very embodiment of everything that had gone wrong. His reign was more a formality than actual power. Real control had slipped from the hands of emperors long before his time into the grasp of powerful generals, warlords, and invading tribes. Romulus was a puppet, his strings pulled by his father, Orestes, a general who tried desperately to hold on to whatever was left of Roman authority. The trouble was that the Western Empire was surrounded on all sides by enemies. The Huns had already come and gone, but not before leaving chaos in their wake. The Germanic tribes, Visigoths, Vandals, Ostrogoths, and others, were carving up the empire like a feast. The Roman army, once the unstoppable force that built roads, cities, and walls, had shrunk to a ragtag group of mercenaries, many of whom had loyalties far from Rome. The empire wasn't just losing territory, it was losing identity, cohesion, and hope. Enter Odoacer, a chieftain of the Germanic tribes and a commander in the Roman army himself. He was no Roman by birth, but he knew the empire's weaknesses better than most. In 476 AD, Odoacer led a rebellion of his troops against Orestes and his son Romulus. The emperor was captured, forced to abdicate, and then sent into exile. The Western Roman Empire, after nearly 500 years of dominance, simply stopped having an emperor. No one replaced Romulus Augustulus. Instead, Odoacer declared himself King of Italy. This moment wasn't marked by a grand battle or a spectacular siege. It was more like a quiet extinguishing of a flickering candle. The empire didn't fall with a bang, but with a long, slow fizzle. Roman political structures had already become hollow shells. The Senate still existed, but had little real influence. governors and officials either switched allegiance or abandoned their posts. The city of Rome itself, once home to 1 million people, was a shadowy fraction of that size. Its glory faded, its streets less vibrant. Odoacer sent the imperial regalia, the crown, purple robes, and symbols of authority, to the Eastern Roman Emperor in Constantinople, signaling that the West no longer needed an emperor. From then on, the Eastern Empire, also known as the Byzantine Empire, would claim to be the sole heir of Rome. Meanwhile, the West became a patchwork of kingdoms ruled by Germanic kings, with no central Roman authority to unify them. But what did this really mean? Was it truly the fall of Rome? The story isn't that simple. The Eastern Empire survived and thrived for another 1,000 years, centered on Constantinople, which was a city as magnificent in its own right as Rome ever was. Byzantine emperors still called themselves Roman emperors, preserving Roman law, culture, and military traditions. They saw themselves as the continuation of the empire, guarding the legacy against enemies like the Persians, Arabs, and later the Turks. Back in the West, while the old Roman order had collapsed, many Roman customs, laws, and infrastructure remained. Roads still connected towns, aqueducts still brought water, and Latin was still spoken in many regions. The Church, which had risen in prominence alongside Christianity, became a powerful stabilizing force, preserving Roman knowledge and serving as the political and spiritual glue in this fragmented world. Rome's fall was more like a transformation, a slow blending of Roman and barbarian worlds. Kings adopted Roman titles, law codes mixed with tribal customs, and cities continued to be centers of trade and culture. The idea of Rome lived on in medieval Europe's imagination and institutions. The Holy Roman Empire, centuries later, would even claim to be Rome's spiritual successor. So, the death of Romulus Augustulus in 476 AD marked the end of an era, a world where a single Roman emperor ruled the vast West, but it also opened the door for new powers, new kingdoms, and a new Europe that, while different, still carried Rome's shadow deep into the future. The legacy of Rome was far from dead. It was simply changing shape, like a river that shifts course but keeps flowing. Thanks for listening. If you're already asleep, great. We've successfully lulled you to sleep. And if you're still awake, well, that's impressive. If you genuinely enjoy these boring stories about history, feel free to subscribe to our channel whenever you're in the mood. Sleep well, and good night.